Hello.
Hi, welcome back.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm so sorry I'm late. I'm supposed to welcome everybody and I wasn't even here. But I'm glad everybody's here and I think you'll find it's worth your while. Thank you for coming. And now should I read what Ecumenical Peace Institute has said, reflections? Is it time to do that?
Please.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So
And everybody mute.
the Ecumenical Peace Institute notes that for some decades, the United States has been the metropole, that's the parent state of a colony, of one of the Earth's largest empires. As was said of the British Empire, the sun never sets on the American Empire, especially when you take into account the chain of military bases with which the United States has encircled its enemies and its competitors and the sources of its raw materials. It must be acknowledged that the colonized people are often people of color. Maintaining control of this system requires an immense standing of military, which is very expensive. The cost is borne by the working class. The profits go to the ruling elite, and that we have classes is one of the United States' biggest secrets, and denying the fact is one of our biggest lies. Another big secret is that many of the people in our colonies would rather run their own countries for their own benefit. Perhaps the dirtiest secret is the horrific degradation of the environment with the military's immense carbon footprint, not to mention the threat of nuclear war or accident. We must pay particular attention to the slaughter of the innocent, either by direct attack or by economic warfare, whether sanctions or siege. People who reveal these lies and secrets are often attacked. Two of these people are the subject of this afternoon's program. Their injuries are not accidental. Forensic architecture and Al-Haq have found that the Shireen Abu Akl's killing was deliberate. Julian Assange is the target of ongoing attack. So I hope you'll enjoy listening to what people have to say about these issues. Thank you.
Okay, we have two wonderful speakers today. Turn off your sound, honey. We have two wonderful speakers today who will give you just a little agenda. First, we will hear from Marjorie Cohn on Julian Assange and related topics. Second, we will hear from Nora Friedman on Shireen Abu Akleh and Palestinian journalists. We will give them just a few minutes to share ideas, and then we will take questions and answers. Please put your questions and answers in the chat. Okay, Marjorie Cohn is a retired criminal defense attorney, professor emerita at Thomas Jefferson School of Law, former president of the National Lawyers Guild, and a member of the advisory board of the Assange Defense and the Bureau of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. Marjorie is a legal and political analyst who writes a regular column for Truth Out, does frequent media commentary, and has published several books. She is a co-host of a national broadcast radio show called Law and Disorder. We're very privileged to welcome Professor Marjorie Cohn.
Thank you, Vivian, and thank you to the Ecumenical Peace Institute for inviting me to speak. And I'm delighted to be here as well with Nora. And I'm going to say a few words about Julian Assange's case.
Okay.
Oh, there she is.
Hello.
Hi, welcome back.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm so sorry I'm late. I'm supposed to welcome everybody and I wasn't even here. But I'm glad everybody's here and I think you'll find it's worth your while. Thank you for coming. And now should I read what the Ecumenical Peace Institute has said, reflections? Is it time to do that?
Please.
Yes,
Okay, thank you. So
and everybody mute.
the Ecumenical Peace Institute notes that for some decades, the United States has been the metropole, that's the parent state of a colony, of one of the Earth's largest empires. As was said of the British Empire, the sun never sets on the American Empire, especially when you take into account the chain of military bases with which the United States has encircled its enemies and its competitors and the sources of its raw materials. It must be acknowledged that the colonized people are often people of color. Maintaining control of this system requires an immense standing of military, which is very expensive. The cost is borne by the working class. The profits go to the ruling elite, and that we have classes is one of the United States' biggest secrets, and denying the fact is one of our biggest lies. Another big secret is that many of the people in our colonies would rather run their own countries for their own benefit. Perhaps the dirtiest secret is the horrific degradation of the environment with the military's immense carbon footprint, not to mention the threat of nuclear war or accident. We must pay particular attention to the slaughter of the innocent, either by direct attack or by economic warfare, whether sanctions or siege. People who reveal these lies and secrets are often attacked. Two of these people are the subject of this afternoon's program. Their injuries are not accidental. Forensic architecture and Al-Haq have found that the Shireen Abu Akl's killing was deliberate. Julian Assange is the target of ongoing attack. So I hope you'll enjoy listening to what people have to say about these issues. Thank you.
Okay, we have two wonderful speakers today. Turn off your sound, honey. We have two wonderful speakers today who will give you just a little agenda. First, we will hear from Marjorie Cohn on Julian Assange and related topics. Second, we will hear from Nora Friedman on Shireen Abu Akleh and Palestinian journalists. We will give them just a few minutes to share ideas, and then we will take questions and answers. Please put your questions and answers in the chat. Okay, Marjorie Cohn is a retired criminal defense attorney, professor emerita at Thomas Jefferson School of Law, former president of the National Lawyers Guild, and a member of the advisory board of the Assange Defense and the Bureau of the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. Marjorie is a legal and political analyst who writes a regular column for Truth Out, does frequent media commentary, and has published several books. She is a co-host of a national broadcast radio show called Law and Disorder. We're very privileged to welcome Professor Marjorie Cohn.
Thank you, Vivian, and thank you to the Ecumenical Peace Institute for inviting me to speak. And I'm delighted to be here as well with Nora. And I'm going to say a few words about Julian Assange's case, and then I know we're going to have a discussion later. In August, attorneys and journalists whom the CIA had spied on when they visited Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks publisher, in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, filed a lawsuit against the CIA, its former director, Mike Pompeo, UC Global, and its director, David Morales, in US District Court. Julian Assange is in a London prison fighting extradition to the United States. He's charged with violating the Espionage Act for exposing US war crimes in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Guantanamo Bay, and he faces 175 years in prison if he's extradited to the United States, tried and convicted. During the 7 years that Julian Assange lived in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, he was visited by more than 100 attorneys, journalists, and doctors. They included his criminal defense attorneys in the US, international human rights lawyers, national security journalists whose sources could be jeopardized if they were exposed, and physicians and medical professionals. The CIA commissioned UC Global, a private Spanish security company, to send images from Assange's visitors' cell phones and laptops, as well as video streamed from their meetings to the CIA. And unbeknownst to anyone there, they actually put recording devices and cameras in the rooms where Mr. Assange was, which essentially live streamed what he was doing and saying back to Washington, according to attorney Richard Roth, who filed the lawsuit. He told me that in an interview on Law and Disorder Radio. He said that, "I think that there was clearly a desire to bring down Julian Assange any way possible." Defendant Morales announced to his employees that UC Global would be operating in the big league and on the dark side with the CIA, and former employees of UC Global said the deal included selling information gathered as a result of the illegal surveillance. Now, one of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit is an attorney who visited, she's a media attorney who visited Assange several times, Deborah Herbeck, and she said on arrival, there was a strict protocol for the protection of Julian, we were told. Passports, mobile phones, cameras, laptops, recording devices, and other electronic equipment were turned over to the security guards in the lobby. We learned much later through a criminal investigation under supervision of a court in Spain that while visitors like me were meeting with Julian in the embassy conference room, the guards next door were taking apart our phones, removing and photographing SIM cards, and we believe downloading data from our electronic equipment. Now, the plaintiffs are alleging that these defendants violated their Fourth Amendment rights to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, and the attorney-client privilege and the physician-patient privilege. This lawsuit came nearly a year after the release of a Yahoo News report documenting the CIA's plans to kidnap and assassinate Assange when he was in the embassy. Pompeo was furious at the 2017 WikiLeaks revelation of the CIA's Vault 7 program, which enabled the CIA to tap into people's cell phones and smart TVs, basically turning them into listening devices. The CIA called the expose the largest data loss in CIA history. Pompeo labeled WikiLeaks a non-state hostile intelligence service, and senior CIA and administration officials ordered sketches and options to assassinate Assange. Donald Trump himself personally asked whether the CIA could assassinate Assange and provide him options for how to do so, according to the Yahoo News report. In 2019, the Trump administration filed an indictment against Assange for WikiLeaks' 2010 publications of evidence of US war crimes in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Guantanamo, which were provided to them by whistleblower Chelsea Manning. Those revelations included 400,000 field reports about the Iraq War, 15,000 unreported deaths of Iraqi civilians, and the systematic rape, torture, and murder committed by Iraqi forces after the US military handed over detainees to a notorious Iraqi torture squad. WikiLeaks also disclosed the Afghan war logs, which are 90,000 reports of more civilian casualties by coalition forces than the US military had admitted to. And its revelations also included the Guantanamo files, 779 secret reports showing that 150 innocent people had been held there for years, and documenting the torture and abuse of 800 men and boys in violation of the Geneva Conventions and the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Both treaties the US has ratified, making them part of US law under the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution. But perhaps most notorious was WikiLeaks' publication of the Collateral Murder video, which documented how in 2007, a US Army Apache attack helicopter gunship targeted and fired on unarmed civilians in Baghdad. At least 18 civilians were killed, including 2 Reuters journalists and a man who came to rescue the wounded. 2 children were injured. Then a US Army Jeep drove over one of the bodies, cutting it in half. That collateral murder video contains evidence of 3 separate war crimes prohibited by the Geneva Conventions and the US Army Field Manual. Now, the Obama administration had prosecuted more whistleblowers under the Espionage Act than all prior presidents combined. But they refused to indict Julian Assange. The Obama administration convened a secret grand jury to determine whether or not to indict Assange, but decided against it because of the so-called New York Times problem. And that is that WikiLeaks did exactly what the New York Times does, and The Guardian, and the Washington Post, and Der Spiegel, and Le Monde. No journalists or media outlet has ever been prosecuted under the Espionage Act for publishing truthful information. The First Amendment protects the right of journalists to publish material that was illegally obtained from a third person if it's a matter of public concern. The US government has never prosecuted a journalist or a media outlet for publishing classified information, an essential tool of journalism. Nevertheless, the Biden administration is vigorously pursuing the extradition and prosecution of Julian Assange. Now, of course, we see Joe Biden tying his coattails to his friend Barack on many issues, but he didn't do it this time. Barack's administration didn't indict Julian Assange, and yet Biden is full speed ahead trying to extradite and prosecute Julian Assange. In January of 2021, UK District Judge Vanessa Bareitzer issued a 132-page decision denying the extradition of Julian Assange to the United States. She wrote that faced with conditions of near total isolation and without protective factors which moderate his risk, I'm satisfied that they will not prevent Mr. Assange from finding a way to commit suicide. And she relied heavily on the testimony of Professor Michael Kopelman, who he met several times with Julian Assange and diagnosed him with post-traumatic stress disorder and recurrent depression. And he concluded, I am as confident as a psychiatrist can ever be that if extradited to the United States, if it were to become imminent, Mr. Assange would find a way of suiciding. Judge Bareitzer determined, I am satisfied that the risk that Mr. Assange will commit suicide is a substantial one. I find that the mental condition of Mr. Assange is such that it would be oppressive to extradite him to the United States of America. Now, this was a decision that she issued after a 3-week extradition hearing, but at no time during that extradition hearing did the United States come forward with any so-called assurances that Julian Assange would not be held in these inhumane conditions if he were indeed extradited to the United States. But later, after her opinion came down, after Barretzer's opinion, the United States was allowed to present so-called assurances that if Assange is extradited and imprisoned in the United States, he will not be subject to special administrative measures, which are basically onerous conditions that would keep him in virtual isolation. And also so-called assurances that he would not be held at the ADX maximum security prison in Florence, Colorado. The US also provided additional assurances that it would not object to Assange serving any custodial sentence he might receive in Australia. These so-called assurances, however, are conditional because the US reserves the right to impose these special administrative measures or hold Assange at ADX if his future behavior warrants. Moreover, the US cannot guarantee that Australia would consent to hosting Assange's incarceration. Amnesty International's Agnès Calamard, who was former UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial summary or arbitrary execution, was skeptical of these so-called assurances that Assange would be treated humanely in US custody. He said they cannot be taken, she said they cannot be taken on face value given previous history. And she was referring to the US reneging on prior past similar extradition assurances. But the High Court, to which the Biden administration appealed the lower court's denial of extradition, allowed these assurances and reversed the denial of extradition in December of 2021. In March of 2022, Julian Assange appealed to the High Court in the UK, I'm sorry, the Supreme Court in the UK to review the High Court's reversal of the denial of extradition and sent the case back to the magistrate's court with instructions to issue the extradition order. So the magistrate issued the extradition order and sent it to the Home Secretary for approval. In June of this year, the Home Secretary approved the extradition order to extradite Julian Assange to the United States. At the end of August, Julian Assange filed an appeal in the High Court, asking the High Court to review and rule on issues that he had raised at his extradition hearing, but that Barretzer, the district judge, had ruled against him. She ruled for him on the suicide issue, but ruled against him on other issues. And so now Julian Assange is asking the High Court to review these additional issues. And they include that he is being prosecuted and punished for his political opinions in violation of the Extradition Act, that he's being prosecuted for protected speech, that the request for extradition violates the US-UK extradition treaty and international law because it is for a political offense, that the US government misrepresented the core facts of the case to the British courts, and that the extradition request and surrounding circumstances constitute an abuse of process. So right now we're waiting to see what the High Court does. And if the High Court refuses to hear these additional issues on appeal, then Julian Assange can appeal to the Supreme Court of the UK, asking them to review these issues. And if that is not satisfactory, and Assange loses, then he can appeal to the European Court of Human Rights because there are several violations of the European Convention on Human Rights in the whole extradition procedure. That could take a number of years. Meanwhile, he is in very dire physical and mental health. Niels Meltzer, UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, said in December 2021, he tweeted that Assange has suffered psychological torture while he has been confined in the UK for more than a decade, first in the Ecuadorian embassy where he received asylum, and later in Belmarsh prison, a high security prison. Niels Meltzer said the UK is literally torturing him to death. Now, in order to bolster the US Department of Justice's case for extradition, the FBI collaborated with an informant called Siggy Thordarson to paint Assange as a hacker rather than a journalist, because if he's a journalist, then this is protected First Amendment freedom of speech. Thordarson later admitted to the Icelandic newspaper Stundin that he had lied about Assange being a hacker in return for immunity from prosecution by the FBI. And just a little background, in 2019, after a pro-US president came to power in Ecuador, in order to facilitate the US's attempted extradition, the London police dragged Assange from the embassy and arrested him for violating bail conditions. And he remains in custody in London's maximum security Belmarsh prison, pending the extradition decision. If Julian Assange is ultimately extradited, tried, convicted, and imprisoned, it will send an ominous message to investigative journalists who would publish evidence of government wrongdoing. The point of the prosecution of Assange is to criminalize national security or investigative journalism. What he did is what journalists do. They protect confidential sources. They communicate with those sources confidentially. They cultivate those sources. They publish classified secrets. Those are the main pillars of investigative journalism, and in particular, national security journalism. If Julian Assange is extradited to the United States and convicted of the charges against him, it would potentially make receiving classified information, asking for sources for more information, and publishing certain types of classified information a crime. It would send a message to investigative journalists that you publish information that is threatening to the United States at your peril. It will chill investigative journalism and strike a blow at the very heart of national security and investigative journalism. So it is imperative that Julian Assange, that extradition be denied, and that Julian Assange be freed, and after he is freed, hailed as a hero for the service that he has provided. Thank you.
Oh, Vivian. Thank you so much, Marjorie Cohn. That was really instructive, and I'm sure that we're all thinking about the options, what we can do about this. Just a reminder to everyone, if you can put your questions in the chat, that will help us a lot. Now, we're very fortunate to have Nora Friedman, and she's going to talk to us about Shireen Abu Akleh and the other Palestinian journalists. Nora is an associate editor at the Electronic Intifada. She co-hosts the Electronic Intifada podcast, which I just watched a wonderful interview with Don Wagner on his new book, Glory to God in the Lowest, which starts out in Sovereign Chatila. Anyway, back to the paper. She has been covering Palestinian human rights issues as a journalist and a broadcaster for nearly 20 years. I can't believe that.
Me neither.
Nora is the author of Our Power, U.S. Students Organize for Justice in Palestine. Nora Friedman.
Thank you so much, Vivian, and thanks to EPI. And it's an honor to be here with Marjorie, who I remember as a fledgling journalist being really intimidated by just calling you up, Marjorie. Hi, can I please have an interview with you? So you've been a hero of mine for so long, and it's really wonderful to be here with you. Yeah, I mean, the story of what's happening to Julian Assange is something that we should all be terrified of and working in any way we can in his defense. And when it comes to the realm that I report in, of course, we're all looking at what's happening to Julian and other investigative journalists and publishers and TV anchors with a lot of caution and a lot of terror, because what they're doing to Julian, as Marjorie said, they will do to us all. You know, and then of course, when it comes to Palestinian journalists, you know, they've thrown many Palestinian journalists in prison, and of course, they just also execute them immediately without any, of course, due process. So that is, you know, exemplified by the recent execution of Shireen Abu Akleh, who, as many of you probably know, she was a veteran at the Al Jazeera network. She was in the living rooms of every family in the Arab world for decades, reporting on what was happening in her own backyard in Palestine, and broadcasting it to not just the Arabic-speaking world, but you know, for people all over. And on May 11th, this past May, she was doing her job. She was with a group of reporters. They were getting ready to do a shoot, and an Israeli sniper took her out. And there have been, you know, numerous investigations and forensic analyses, and, you know, by not just Palestinian human rights organizations, who are all but ignored when it comes to investigating violations of human rights and the executions of Palestinians, but by CNN, by Israeli human rights groups, by Amnesty International. And yet, of course, the State Department, which covers for Israel every single hour of every single day. I think Ned Price, our State Department secretary, said, his spokesperson, he said just a couple of weeks ago that, quote, "We've always been very clear that we're not looking for criminal accountability in Shireen Abu Akleh's case." So one of the things that I always like to talk about when we talk about the murder of Palestinians by Israeli forces is something that is a question that is never asked or answered when it comes to mainstream coverage. What was the Israeli army doing in Jenin in the first place? They're an occupying army. They should not have been there. They were in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. They were conducting random arrest raids of the occupied population, preparing to transfer those Palestinians to the occupied, to Israel, in violation of of international law. That question, what was Israel and its army doing in Jenin in the first place, was never even talked about. It's just been so normalized that the Israeli military can, at any whim, invade Palestinian cities, towns, villages, and refugee camps. So they were preparing to do a mass arrest raid in Jenin. Shireen Abu Akleh and other Palestinian journalists were getting ready, as I said, to do their work, to do their job, to document what was happening. And the Israeli army, they got one sniper to pick her off. And her colleague, Ali Samoudi, was also shot in the back. And at first, I mean, I think we all remember, at first, the Israeli army said, no, it was Palestinian fighters. You know, we didn't have anything to do with that. It was Palestinian fighters, even though the videos that were being taken by these reporters showed that there was no Palestinian resistance fighters anywhere near the area, that it was 100% the fault of Israeli snipers who were stationed, 500 yards away from Shireen and the other journalists. And still, Israel absolved itself. They blame Palestinian resistance forces unequivocally. Then they attacked her funeral in Jerusalem. I think we might have all seen that footage. Several days later, Shireen Abu Akleh's funeral happened, and Israeli police mobbed the group of mourners and beat the pallbearers so that the casket almost tipped over completely. And then just a few weeks ago, Israel conducted what could only be described as a sham, a superficial investigation into Shireen's assassination. They claimed that they still said the Palestinian gunmen fired towards the Israeli army vehicle, even though there's absolutely no evidence for that, and the video doesn't show that. The Haaretz, the Tel Aviv newspaper, said one of the soldiers believed Abu Akleh was part of the armed militants who fired at them, and he shot at her through a telescopic scope. That was completely debunked. Then the Israeli army said it cannot be unequivocally determined who shot her. It needs to be said that there were both IDF soldiers and Palestinians at the scene. But here's the question, and my colleague Maureen Murphy, who has been doggedly reporting on this, said, how could the Israelis claim to know that one of their soldiers shot at her through a telescopic sight, while at the same time have no idea who it was? Israel is one of the most technologically advanced surveillance states. Israel and the US share surveillance technology. Israel knows exactly who they were firing at. The rifle had a telescopic sight. They had, that means that they could see clearly that not only was it Shireen, a very recognizable face, but that they had press, flak jackets on. And finally, the Israeli military, their office said that it would not open an investigation into any of the soldiers involved, as, quote, there is no suspicion that a criminal offense was committed. So here we are. And of course, we have Ned Price, as I mentioned earlier, the State Department spokesperson, who says that, we basically leave it up to Israel. If they, determine that it was a soldier, it's within their rights to can someone mute? I think. Oh, there we go. That is what it's basically up to Israel to decide what to do. Even though Shireen is a Palestinian American, you'd think that maybe that would give it a little bit more urgency or leverage on the part of the US to hold her murderers accountable. Of course, we've seen what has happened to other American citizens. I mean, Rachel Corrie, right, and Brian Avery, and people who have been, either murdered or maimed by the Israeli military. And of course, there's still no justice all these years later. So I wanted to just, because it's so important, and it's still, this information is hardly out there. And it just kind of exemplifies how the US, the Imperial Corps, gives Israel a pass and defends it at every step. I just wanted to play this short documentary video. It's only about, I think, 7 minutes, that I think Diana referred to in the opening remarks. This is produced by Al Haq, which is a premier Palestinian human rights organization, and forensic architecture. And they put together this incredible video about that really lays out what actually happened on May 11th. So I'm just gonna
just before you do that, we want to remind everyone to please mute yourself, please. And also, please do not message everyone while the speaker's talking. The speaker's talking, not us. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, here we go. Can everyone see the screen? Yes? Okay, here we go.
اذا الجبان او الجيش ما بده ايانا انه نقرب للمنطقه معينه، ببلش مثلا يضرب مثلا قنابل صوت، قنابل غاز، مرات ممكن مثلا رصاصه يضربوها على الارض عشان احنا نفهم انه ممنوع نقرب، فعلى طول احنا بنرجع. بس كل هذا الشيء ما صار، واحنا طولنا واحنا واقفين هون، يعني احنا ما وقفنا مثلا ثانيتين، يعني انا متاكده انه كان الموضوع بيتجاوز الثلاث لاربع لخمس دقائق.
On the 11th of May 2022, prominent Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh and 5 other journalists arrived in Jenin to report on a raid by the Israeli occupying forces on a nearby refugee camp. Within minutes of their arrival, the group was targeted by a convoy of IOF military vehicles approximately 200 meters up the road. Shireen was fatally shot in the head, and Ali al-Samoudi was shot in the back. Al-Haq's Forensic Architecture Unit and Forensic Architecture have investigated this case. Al Jazeera provided us with the complete and previously unseen footage from the incident. We analyzed the footage, synchronized it with other videos given to us, and posted online. At 6:28, a witness's video shows journalists Shada Hanaisha and Mujahid al-Saadi standing at the end of the road where the Israeli military vehicles were stationed for the raid. At 6:30, it shows Shireen and her colleague Ali al-Samoudi nearby as they begin walking up the road. At 6:31, the video shows the journalists, including Shireen, slowly walking towards the IOF position.
Sorry about that. So that's the investigation, one of the most recent forensic analyses that has been done in the wake of the murder of Shireen. And of course, because Shireen was such a prominent figure, and this was such a highly visible execution, this work had to be done, and this kind of work can't be done for other Palestinians who are frequently shot, killed by Israeli forces. But even with this kind of forensic evidence, the State Department won't do anything. Of course, the Israeli government will never do anything. No Israeli soldier has ever been held accountable in real terms for the murder of Palestinians, for torture, for expulsion, obviously in the last 74 years, because it enjoys complete impunity and defense by the West. So the family, Shireen's family, are taking it into their own hands, just as the Rachel Corrie's family tried to do, to figure out what the next step is. They're not just accepting Israel's self-absolving of responsibility. There are a few members of Congress. I don't have the names in front of me right now, but there are some members of Congress here in the US who are listening to the Abu Akleh family and are trying to get a resolution or a bill passed to call for a full and thorough investigation, not conducted by Israel or another state that has a stake in defending Israeli forces. But that's where we're at. I mean, and it's, of course, as I said at the beginning, it's not just Shireen. It's, I think El Mazan, let me see here, El Mazan Center for Human Rights said that they've documented at least 425 violations against Palestinian journalists, media personnel, and press facilities in the Gaza Strip, just in the Gaza Strip alone during the period between January 2000 and last week. So in the last 22 years, in just the Gaza Strip alone, there have been 425 violations, 320 of which were against press staff and 105 violations against press facilities. These violations have led to the killing of 26 journalists during doing their job, the injury of more than 300, and the total and partial destruction of hundreds of media facilities. And of course, last year, during Israel's assault on Gaza in May of 2021, the Israeli military, which I mentioned, has the most high-level surveillance technology you can imagine. They bombed to the ground. They completely leveled this 10-story building housing media offices, Al Jazeera's media office, the AP, the Associated Press, and also just a myriad of local Palestinian and other Arab regional media. And they claimed that they didn't know that it was a media building. I mean, it was like an iconic building in the Gaza Strip. Every journalist who's been there knows the Al Jahwara building because that's where all the press offices are. And of course, Israel knows exactly who is walking down the street on any given day because of the drones, because of the various ways that they can surveil Gaza, not to mention the West Bank and the hundreds of checkpoints that all of these biometric scanners and high-tech surveillance equipment are had. So they said, oh, we didn't know it was a media building. And once again, the US completely absolved them from any responsibility. So that's where Palestinian journalism is at. It's one of the, I mean, just like Julian Assange, you report on the deliberate crimes of war of a Western government, and you either get tortured to death or you get outright executed. And so that's where we're at in terms of what's happening to journalists just doing their job in Palestine and around the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Nora. You just broken all our hearts, I must say. We thought that it would be unique and special to give you and Marjorie just a very few minutes to question each other, just in case. We'll go to our own Q&As and some interesting observations too. So Marjorie and Nora, you're on to interview each other.
I wanted to ask Marjorie, what can we do about Julian right now? What can ordinary folks and myself as a journalist, like what's the most important thing that we can do for Julian's case?
Well, on October, there's going to be a human chain around Parliament in London, and there are a lot of people who are supporting that. If you go to AssangeDefense.org, which is the group that I'm on the board of, you can get information about that. But I think in general, I would go to AssangeDefense.org because it lays out the case and the issues and also gives people ideas about how they can get involved.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple comments in response to your presentation, if that's okay. And one of the, first of all, I've never seen that video, and it's really compelling and just heartbreaking. But 2 weeks before the Israeli occupying forces assassinated Shireen, a group of Palestinian journalists, the International Federation of Journalists, the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate, and the International Center of Justice for Palestinians had submitted a formal complaint to the International Criminal Court accusing Israel of systematically targeting Palestinian journalists. And they alleged the violation of the right to life and freedom of expression. And in May, on May 13th, UN human rights experts condemned the assassination and said it's part of a continuation of a high rate of attack against media workers. And authorities have an obligation not to harm journalists, to protect them from harm under international humanitarian law and human rights law. And they said the targeting of journalists working in the occupied Palestinian territory and the Israeli government's failure to properly investigate the killings of media personnel violate the rights to life and to effective remedies. And they talk about a litany of extrajudicial executions. And they say that the safety of journalists is crucial to guaranteeing the rights to freedom of expression and media freedom. Also, I wanted to say that Al-Haq, which is one of the groups that did that investigation and came to the conclusion that Israeli occupying forces had assassinated Shireen, was one of 6 Palestinian human rights organizations that was declared to be terrorist organizations with absolutely no evidence, secret evidence. Even the CIA said there was no evidence for it back in October. And then in August of this year, those 6 groups plus a 7th Palestinian human rights organization were raided by the Israeli forces and basically shut down. Their offices were ransacked, and they can face criminal charges if they start to work again. And these are, groups that help women and children and agricultural workers with their with human rights violations. And also a very recent thing that happened is that Katie Halpern was supporting, this just came out. She's a progressive commentator, and on Thursday, she was censored and fired by The Hill, which is a corporate-owned media outlet, for defending Rashida Tlaib's characterization of Israel as an apartheid state. And of course, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the Israeli group B'Tselem have all said that Israel is an apartheid state. And of course, it goes beyond that. Israel is engaging in ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. But you say that the US government won't do anything. And basically when Israel says jump, the US says how high? You want more money? Here it is. You want more weapons? Here they are. The US provides Israel $3.8 billion a year in military assistance. And in July, Biden went to Israel and Saudi Arabia. Our other big buddy, even though there was, Khashoggi was assassinated. Another journalist who worked for the Washington Post was assassinated by the Saudi government, and the US just turned its head. And Biden pledged allegiance to Israel when he went there and called Israel a democracy. Well, of course, if you're Jewish, it's a democracy, but if you're not Jewish, it's not democratic at all. There's this apartheid system. Anyway, I didn't mean to go on and on and on, but just seeing that video just triggered all those thoughts. So sorry if I.
No, it's really important. Thank you. And, and there's, it's, and one more thing about Al-Haq and the 6 other organizations that you mentioned that were raided, and they had their doors welded shut with like these iron, slats. And their hard drives were taken, everything. Those organizations, and Al-Haq at the forefront of it, have been petitioning the International Criminal Court to take up the issue of Palestine, and specifically the head of the Israeli military, Benny Gantz, who the Palestinian organizations have named in the war crimes probe because of his involvement in ordering the attacks on Gaza in 2014. He was the one who ordered the raiding of these 6 Palestinian organizations. So you see how it works, how one of the top Israeli politicians says that these organizations are terrorist organizations, because they are specifically naming him as a war crime suspect to the ICC. It's just, it's so absurd. The absurdity doesn't even cut it. But the fact that that this is able to go on, and the U.S. State Department just continues to give Israel a pass, it is unconscionable. And we've seen this for the last 74 years.
Well, thank you both for the little exchange there, because it is really nice to hear you really speaking from your heart and telling the awful things that keep us awake at night.
Yeah.
But I do have a few questions here and a couple of comments. I was really glad that Marjorie mentioned the event that's going to be taking place for Julian Assange. There's also going to be one Saturday, this coming Saturday, at Julian Herman Plaza in San Francisco. It's going to be a replica of the hands around I think Code Pink is responsible for it, but I know it starts at noon. They're going to have yellow ribbons that say free Julian Assange. And so we encourage anybody who can to join in that event. And I have a question that's kind of maybe not too practical, but I really like your opinion on it. A lot of our group here is not really that young, as you might have noticed. And what do you think of just the practice of daily sending a postcard to Biden about Assange? I was so impressed. AMLO offered Julian Assange some kind of I don't know, refuge in Mexico. And then he tweeted out that Biden should drop the charges. So you can think about that and give me an answer in a minute. But I have a real question here. I believe this is for Marjorie. When it was revealed that Nixon's plumbers burgled the office of Daniel Ellsberg, psychiatrist, the case against Ellsberg was immediately dismissed by the court. When a similar adventure took Trump's CIA to the Spanish security company and violated Assange's lawyer-client privilege, doctor-patient privilege, there was no outrage. What accounts for the deterioration of these standards, and who profits from it?
Well, first of all, I think that all the pressure possible, postcards or any kind of pressure is important. So I would encourage people to pressure Biden, and he needs to be pressured. Whether they get through to him or not, I don't know, but I know that also Congress members do respond to their constituents. And so any kind of pressure that can be brought to bear, I think, is important. In terms of Dan Ellsberg, it wasn't an immediate dismissal. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the reason that the charges were ultimately dismissed against him was because of misconduct by the judge in that case. But it did get a lot of publicity, of course, because he turned over the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times. Now, in terms of Assange, there is a lot of people in this country, and perhaps in other countries, but particularly in the United States, don't know about the case, or, and particularly some people on the left are very much opposed to Julian Assange because of things that have been out there accusing him of WikiLeaks, of turning over emails from the DNC that they say hurt Hillary in the election. But it's important to keep in mind that Julian Assange has been charged not for anything to do with the presidential election and Hillary Clinton, but rather for WikiLeaks revealing evidence of US war crimes in 2010 and 2011. And there is also some opposition to Julian Assange because of an investigation that was pending in Sweden, which has since been dismissed. Charges have never been filed, accusing him of sexual misconduct with two women, both of whom have recanted the charges. So I think that the media, the corporate media, has really done their job in putting out propaganda and false information, tarring Julian Assange, who really is a journalist. He's a hero. He should be celebrated. He should not be locked up and a suicide risk and being tortured for doing what the New York Times and Der Spiegel and all those other newspapers did. They published information from WikiLeaks. They published classified information all the time. And yet when WikiLeaks did it, and particularly when WikiLeaks revealed evidence of US war crimes, that was a bridge too far for the United States.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning, I just saw just before this started, I think I was late because I was so enthralled with the journalist Halpern, the young woman who was defending Tlaib and Rashida Tlaib, and she was fired. And she played this video that is a powerful video. Please, everybody, find it. She was fired from the Hill for being an honest woman. And here, this is for Nora. It relates to the young Halpern journalist. What advice do you have when people of conscience who speak up and act up for Palestinian rights are immediately smeared, like for
monologue,
anti-Semitic or whatever? Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, don't take it seriously. If it's meant to stop people in their tracks. And it's meant to silence and suppress any sort of criticism of Israel. And it's really, I mean, it's an outcome of what Zionism has done. Zionism has hijacked Judaism, and has tried to make Israel and the Jewish people one and the same, which I think is actually an act of actual anti-Semitism, as though we're a monolithic people, as though we have a dual loyalty or a sole loyalty to a state that represents us, and that state happens to be murderous and barbaric and an apartheid state. That's not who we are. That's not who I am. And so, you know, I think it is, you know, you have to bring it back to what Judaism is. Judaism is a religion, it's a tradition, it's a culture. Israel is Zionism is a political ideology predicated on the supremacy of one group of people over the indigenous natives. And it is not an inherent part of Judaism. Zionism has only been around for the last, I don't know, 140, 150 years as a political ideology, as a settler colonial political ideology. And so this is the way that Israel lobby groups attempt to, and unfortunately they have been somewhat successful in silencing people, and in, you know, because if you're accused of bigotry, then you know, then that ends the conversation. And so what we need to do is fight against legislation that is trying to couple Judaism and Zionism, and therefore criticism of Israel, with anti-Semitism. There is something called the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism, the IHRA definition, and it has been, codified into law across Europe. It has made, for example, in Germany, of all ironic places, illegal basically to criticize Israel, because the IHRA says that if you criticize Israel as a political project, then that is tantamount to anti-Jewish bigotry. They are trying to pass variations of the IHRA here in this country. There has been federal legislation that's been passed around. There are now 35 US states, 35 out of 50 US states that have passed some form of anti-BDS measure that is predicate. Like if you look at the, and I'm sure Marjorie can talk more about this too, like if you look at the legal, you know, writing in the bills and measures, it heavily relies on the IHRA definition that says if you criticize Israel or call Israel a racist or apartheid state, then that's tantamount to anti-Jewish bigotry. So now, of course, you know, in the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which is a movement started by Palestinian civil society that is a cry to the international community to not buy Israeli products. And to divest, you know, for example, your, you know, pension fund portfolios from companies that do business with Israel. The same sort of BDS activism that helped end apartheid in South Africa. That is now considered to be anti-Jewish bigotry, which is just, to me and to many people, is a complete perversion of what anti-Semitism really is. So, you know, it's a distraction, and you have to always, you know, as I say, like, follow the money, see who benefits from calling you a bigot when you know that you're not, when you're working as an anti-racist, when you're working against apartheid, when you're working for the human rights and for equality of all people, especially in Palestine and Israel. You have to just wave it off. It's hurtful, obviously. And it, you know, but we have to kind of redefine what it actually is and what it's not.
Can I add
I
one thing?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, Yeah, no, I think I'm really glad, Nora, that you brought up BDS because Al-Haq, one of the organizations that did this investigation into Shireen's assassination, and also one of the human rights groups that was accused of being terrorist and shut down, supports BDS. And when Biden went to Israel, he and Lapin, Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapin, affirmed that they would continue to work together to combat all efforts to boycott or delegitimize Israel. And a few years ago, Netanyahu said that BDS was an existential threat to Israel. And as you said, BDS was a call by Palestinian civil society, a non-violent movement to put pressure on Israel by boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So I think that if people are not aware of it, they should type in BDS or boycott, divestment, and sanctions, go to the website, which will tell you the products that should be boycotted. And that is a way to fight against the illegal activities of Israel, the Zionist state. And I just want to say one more thing. I think that your description, Nora, your contrast of Judaism and Zionism is a really good one. It's one of the best I've heard. And there's no, really, and people confuse them all the time. And whenever there's any criticism of Israel, as you say, the pro-Israeli groups, including many in the United States, just say, "Oh, you're being anti-Semitic." There's a book that's edited by Carolyn Karsher. It's called Reclaiming Judaism from Zionism, and it's testimonials from about 40 people. I have a testimonial in there, former Zionists, rabbis, students, activists, etc., that talk about their own personal experiences and why they turned against Zionism. And I think one of the most interesting things about the book is the very extensive introduction and afterword, which talk about the development of Zionism and what it really is, because it's that term is thrown around and interchangeably with Judaism. And I think it's important for people to understand the difference.
Yeah, and one of the biggest, if not the biggest community, Zionist communities in the US is the evangelical Christian community,
Yep.
Who are actual anti-Semites. They support Israel because they want to bring about the end times. And that's not talked about either.
Right.
So, yeah.
Exactly. Christian Zionists, who read the scriptures as saying that Jesus will not return unless the temple is rebuilt. And there's a much better chance the temple will be rebuilt if it's in Jewish hands than if it's in Muslim hands. And of course, once the temple is rebuilt and Jesus comes back, then all the Jews convert to Christianity or they get killed. That's the piece that the Jews just kind of ignore for the immediate benefit of the support for Israel. But I think that is a big factor. You're right.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to get in trouble, but I got to say one thing first. That book that you interviewed, if you go to Nora's blog, you'll see her interviewing Don Wagner, and he is an incredible authority on Christian Zionism, having been one himself and been brought up in the evangelical.
I'll put that link up in the chat.
The other thing I've got to say before I get in trouble is, if you'd like to donate to Ecumenical Peace Institute, please go to EPI CALC, and the CALC stands for
Clergy and Laity Concerned.
Thank you. Clergy and Laity Concerned, and that was founded by Dan Berrigan, Abraham Joshua Herschel, a couple of other guys, including William Sloan Coffin, and EPI is one of the original members of CALC, Clergy and Laity Concerned. Okay.
I would like a question.
And go to the post office box. If you don't want to donate online, you go to the post office box, which is box 9334, and it's in Berkeley, and the zip code is 94709, post office box 93 And this little thing up on my picture there gives the address if you can see it. So if you enlarge my picture, you can read the address up there. I'm sorry, I almost forgot about that. I do want to ask this one question to Marjorie. There was a recent interview on Consortium News with the former president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, who gave us asylum to Julian. And then you spoke about Nels Meltzer's, the rapporteur for UN, about the condition of the torture. He says psychological torture is not torture light. And supposing that the charges are dismissed, that Biden gets smart and dismisses them, and Julian is released, where could he go to recover? You're muted, Marjorie. You're muted.
I'm sorry. That's a good question. Julian has recently married Stella Assange in prison. There was a prison ceremony. They have 2 little children. She lives in London. She's South African. I'm sure there are many places that would take him in. I know that he's Australian, but as you said, AMLO in Mexico has been has offered him asylum. So I don't think it will be a problem if and when Julian Assange is released. I don't think it will be a problem finding a place that will nurture him and his family and help him to recover everything that he's lost over the last decade or so.
So you think he'll be safe in South Africa?
I don't know. Hopefully, I don't know where they would want to live, but I know that there are places that that would be happy to have him. And I'm sure it won't be the United States. I doubt if it will be Britain or probably Australia. So I don't know. That's a personal matter for them to decide. And I hope that they have that decision to make.
Okay, then the one last question for both of you is, what actions are you able to suggest for us grassroots people to do our little bit to change this situation? It's for both of you.
You know, I mean, when I was just starting out doing public speaking many years ago, it was before the BDS call came out, and there was like, and this question would come up and be like, I don't know, write your congressman, try to have like local meetings with fellow activists and try to do a protest campaign. But they were so few and far between. And then in 2005, the BDS campaign was launched, and it gave people really a central focus to campaign around. And they were really, you know, there's so many actionable items. Many church groups, for example, are campaigning to, you know, not just declare Israel an apartheid state like the Presbyterian Church just did at their convention, but really taking material actions. So like they're boycotting Hewlett-Packard products, for example. So no HP products are bought by you know, church offices. HP, of course, is one of the main manufacturers of biometric technologies at the checkpoints. There are other you know, other campaigns. I mean, the Ben & Jerry's campaign that has actually been pretty successful in the last year and a half. That, you know, the foundation for that was laid by Vermonters for Peace and Justice, which is like kind of a ragtag group of 60 and 70-year-olds who have in Vermont, who have been meeting regularly for decades to try and get their local ice cream producer to stop selling in the settlements. And, you know, it took a while, but it's really taken off. So there are ways for communities to get involved around the BDS campaign. There's also, I mean, you know, I still say talk to your elected leaders. They answer to you. They shouldn't answer to corporations or apartheid states. That, you know, their job is still to answer to their constituents. And yeah, I think just do what you can and do it with rigor and principle, and you know, and that's where to start.
Yeah.
I think that's great advice, Nora. And I would also say that in terms of, in general, both when you're talking about Israel, Palestine, and Assange as well, it's important to write letters to the editor. Even though your letter may not get published, it will help other letters from the same point of view get published. And just, you know, when you see a news story or an editorial about these issues, keep it under 150 words and submit it to your local newspapers, and you'd be surprised. It's not that hard to get them published. Write op-eds if you can, call, email, visit your Congress member's office, pressure the White House as well. And in terms, I think the most important thing is to get the facts down, is to understand what's happening. And programs like this, I think, are very important. Niels Meltzer just published a book recently about Julian Assange, which is very, very helpful. If you go on my website, marjoriecohn.com, and you put in the search box Assange, you'll come up with a whole bunch of articles that you can read. They're not that long, and they will give you some background about the case so that you can be in a position to contact Congress members, contact the White House, write letters to the editor, etc.
Marjorie, I think someone sent you 2 private chats that with questions that didn't understand that we were going to do them publicly. If you would like to answer those, we might have time for that.
Let's see, where are they?
They're directed to you. While you're looking for them, I'm going to acknowledge this wonderful Donna Wallach, who was one of the original people who took a boat to Gaza, and thank her for her years of fantastic activism and her wonderful comments that are also true.
I think you mean Tony Scar, and I
Yeah,
had
yeah.
seen those questions, and I think I answered them. I think I answered them about the New York Times problem, what it is that newspapers like WikiLeaks publish classified information, and that what's happening to Julian Assange violates his First Amendment rights to freedom of the press and freedom of speech. I think that responds to those questions.
Can I ask a reformulation of one of them briefly? And that is, what constitutes a legitimate rule of confidentiality for governmental employees, such that, and I'm agreeing completely with you on Julian Assange, completely. But what constitutes a legitimate rule of confidentiality for government employees such that they cannot disclose things told to them in confidence based upon their individual determination that it's morally necessary to do so? In other words, is the Roe versus Wade leak of a proposed opinion similar to the Julian Assange case?
You know, I don't know what the rules are in the Supreme Court. I'm sure that they signed non-disclosure agreements, and that probably violated them, although it did a great public service, I think, to the rest of us. You know, using Donald Trump as an example, you know, stealing classified information, whether it's classified or not, it's top secret. It belongs to the government. It does not belong to Donald Trump. And I don't know what he was going to use it for, whether for leverage, political leverage, or selling it or what. That is highly illegal on many, many different fronts. And just because he's a former president, he certainly doesn't have a right to basically steal all those government documents. They belong to the government. But I don't know if that really answers your question.
I have a question I'd like to deal with. Actually, I'd like to know how the use of the word terrorism is being used, because I hear people say that what's the Antifa is a terrorist organization, which is just plain bullshit, if you mind my saying so. But there is such a thing as terrorism. It has a definition, which is to attack civilians for a political purpose, such as bombing people's apartment buildings in Gaza. And so who's a terrorist now?
Yeah, you said it well. I mean, it is it should be a very objective term, but it is very subjective when it's spoken or politicized by those in power who want to use it for their own gain. So yeah.
And you have a list of all those things which we can boycott. I'm curious about the Teva pharmaceutical company. Is that Israeli?
I believe it is. Yeah.
Well, it seems like half the things that Kaiser buys for me is Teva.
Yeah. My husband has the same issue. You can pay out of pocket $400 for something that Teva sells for $3. So, this is also a good opportunity to talk to Kaiser, for example, about their buying practices. I mean, there are ways, even if they don't say, okay, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, at least you've gotten the conversation started.
Well,
but there
fortunately, I'm allergic to the Teva brand of warfarin.
Oh, there you go.
I break out in little spots.
Yeah, you don't want that. I put a link to the BNC, the BDS National Committee, and that's they have a list of all the items that are on the boycott list.
I think people don't want to go home. This is such a wonderful, well, I can't say wonderful, but it's been a growth experience, an enlightening experience, and we greatly appreciate our speakers. I guess Mark is going to let us stay on until we get tired of talking, but I want to thank everybody for being there. I'm so happy to see Pierre there.
Yeah, same. Hi, Pierre.
Well,
yeah.
being part of it, I'll say we seem to have about half of the Haiti Action Committee here tonight.
That was a great presentation. Thank you both. This is fantastic. Marjorie, Nora, beautiful. And EPI, much love to you all, to everyone. That was powerful. Thank you. We'll change the world. We will make it happen.
We have to.
Peace and justice.
But Pierre, you did mention something about some Haitian journalists who were attacked by the US UN government.
Yes, very briefly in Haiti, just about, was it 2 weeks ago? Well, many journalists have been killed, and Nora did a powerful coverage of Haiti. And there is a video called What's Going On in Haiti. But very briefly, about 3 weeks ago or so, the gangs, who they are really death squads working with the Haitian government. They killed 2 journalists, burned them while they were still, they were still alive when their bodies were burned. So I don't want to keep everybody on, but it's a deliberate attack against journalists worldwide, people who are bringing us the truth. So I just wanted to, and I want to pay a special tribute to Julian Assange, also to Shireen. But Julian did a lot of work on Haiti, WikiLeaks, and put out a lot of information that made us see that we were not crazy, because all of those cables from the US Embassy that were given to him and he made them public, it really shed a lot of light. Those cables shed a lot of light on what has been going on in Haiti. So thank you all so much, much respect and love to all the journalists in the world.
Thanks, Pierre.
Thank you so much, Pierre. Katie's been at it forever.
To all the anti-imperialist journalists.
Yes, thank you for the clarification. Very important.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all so much. I'm gonna go make dinner for my 6-year-old.
Oh,
Yeah.
very important.
Congratulations.
much.
We didn't know you had a 6-year-old.
I have a 6-year-old and a 21-year-old. I'm very tired.
Maybe the 20-year-old can cook.
You did a
Well,
great
she's
job.
at college, so it's a long commute, but thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Marjorie.
And
Thank you, Nora. and Thank you, Marjorie.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Marjorie.
And
Thank you,
thank you.
Nora.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, Vivian.